Articles of impeachment. Democrats unveil 2 charges against President Donald Trump. We have reaction from the White House and Capitol Hill. The faithful and the president. In part 2 of our exclusive look at polling numbers for the 2020 election, we examine how Catholics view the president. Meeting with Russia. Why a high-ranking Kremlin official is in Washington, D.C. today. And the tender approach. Pope Francis tells the faithful something we can do to please God. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, December 10th, 2019.
The House Committee on the Judiciary is introducing 2 articles of impeachment charging the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, with committing high crimes and misdemeanors.
A major development on Capitol Hill as House Democrats seek to impeach the president. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Democrats put forward 2 articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The House Judiciary Committee plans to debate and vote on the charges this week. We have team coverage tonight. Mark Irons will join us with reaction from the White House. But first, Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi rounds up what appears to be history in the making. Jason?
Yes, Wyatt, this is only the 4th time in American history that the House has drafted articles of impeachment. And so far, it's just Democrats on board.
Democrats enter the history books.
We do not take this action lightly, but we have taken an oath to defend the Constitution.
They write 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump. First, abuse of power in holding up aid to Ukraine and asking the country to investigate Joe Biden's son.
The integrity of our next election is at risk from a president who has already sought foreign interference in the 2016 and 2020 elections and who consistently puts himself above country.
The second article of impeachment, obstruction of Congress. That comes from ignoring the House's subpoenas.
If allowed to stand, it would decimate Congress's ability to conduct oversight of this president or any other in the future, leaving this president and those who follow to be free to be as corrupt, malfeasant, or incompetent as they would like, with no prospect of discovery or accountability.
And for that, Democrats say President Trump deserves removal from office.
What do you make of the articles of impeachment today, leader?
Not much.
Republicans on the Hill tell me this impeachment is wrong.
They still move forward with impeachment just because they're afraid President Trump will get reelected, not because he committed any crimes. That's the ultimate abuse of power by Democrats, is using impeachment as a tool to try to hurt President Trump's chances at reelection.
The House Judiciary Committee will vote this week on these articles of impeachment. If approved, they'll send it to the full House for a vote. From there, it would head over to the Senate, where Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says senators have to decide between 2 options. One is a full trial, where they call witnesses. The second is to say they've already heard enough and to vote right away on those articles of impeachment. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. White House correspondent Mark Irons continues our team coverage. He brings us President Trump's reaction to the articles of impeachment. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump is responding by using a phrase he has often used before, witch hunt. That's what he thinks of the Democrats' effort to impeach him. And the president isn't the only one speaking out today here at the White House.
President Trump tells his followers on Twitter to impeach a president who has proven through results, including producing perhaps the strongest economy in our country's history, to have one of the most successful presidencies ever, and most importantly, who has done nothing wrong, is sheer political madness. Hashtag 2020 election. In a White House statement, Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham adds, House Democrats have long wanted to overturn the votes of 63 million Americans. They have determined that they must impeach President Trump because they cannot legitimately defeat him at the ballot box. If impeached, White House spokesman Hogan Gidley says the president would welcome a trial in the Republican-controlled Senate. I asked him about the possibility of Republican senators voting to convict the president on impeachment charges.
Is there any concern some Republicans could turn against the president in the Senate?
Not at this point. Everyone we've talked to understands that, number one, the president's done nothing wrong. Number two, the process is unfair. And number three, Democrats have done nothing for the American people.
2/3 of the Senate would have to provide a vote of guilty on one of the two articles of impeachment against President Trump in order for him to be convicted and removed from office. It is unlikely in the GOP-controlled Senate. Wyatt.
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. President Trump also pushes back against his FBI director. He thinks Christopher Wray is mishandling the response to the Russia investigation. Monday, the Inspector General reported significant problems with how agents conducted the probe of the Trump campaign.
It should never again happen to another president. It is incredible, far worse than I would have ever thought possible.
Even though the IG report criticized the FBI, it said the agency was justified to start the Russia investigation, adding it was not politically motivated. One area where Democrats and President Trump appear to agree is a modified North American trade pact. If passed, it would hand the White House a major legislative victory. Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced she will endorse the pact called the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement. She calls it a significant improvement over the original trade deal. The pact is the president's top Capitol Hill priority, along with funding for his long-sought border wall. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tells his Russian counterpart any foreign interference in American elections is unacceptable.
I made our expectations of Russia clear. The Trump administration will always work to protect the integrity of our elections, period. Should Russia or any foreign actor take steps to undermine our democratic processes, we will take action in response.
Pompeo and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov held wide-ranging talks today in Washington, D.C. Lavrov denies any Russian involvement in the 2016 presidential election. The U.S. and Moscow are working together in counterterrorism and anti-narcotics measures. The pair later met with President Trump.
Good afternoon, everyone.
We continue our exclusive EWTN News Real Clear Opinion research polling. Tonight, we examine the Catholic voters' views of President Donald Trump and where he stacks up against political 2020 rivals. Join me now are Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, John Della Volpe, Director of Polling at Real Clear Opinion Research, and Matthew Bunson, Executive Editor for EWTN News. All are back with us tonight. John, we are less than a year out from the presidential election. Where do Catholics stand in terms of their views on President Donald Trump?
Overall, when you look at the Catholic vote overall, they mirror in many ways the general electorate at the highest level. For example, 42% of the general electorate approve of his job performance, 44% of Catholics say the same. So that's consistent. When we look at Catholics who are likely Democratic primary voters and Democratic primary voters, the president is trailing against each of the major candidates on the Democratic side. So he's at that sort of disadvantage at that stage. However, things change when we ask what we call kind of a traditional re-elect question in terms of on a scale from 1 to 5, how likely are you to vote for the president? So while he's trailing today relative to the top Democratic challengers, that could certainly change over the course of the next several months.
And Carl, let me have you jump in here and also reiterate your thoughts on that same subject. The survey data shows Donald Trump's currently behind the Democratic candidates. How else can you explain that?
Well, look, you don't want to spin it. If you're the Republicans, you'd rather be ahead than behind. However, history of recent elections, going back all the way to 1980, show us what's going on now in the polls isn't always determined what's going to happen. And one reason is, think the limits of polling are horse race questions a year out. That's the outer limit of the science, because if you think about it, every question to a voter begins with a lie at this point. And the lie is said by the pollster. And the lie is, if the election were held today, who would you vote for? Well, the voters know darn well it's not held today. And so they got a year, first of all, to make up their minds. Secondly, send some messages to us, we in the elites in Washington or the political parties. And so it's not, they're not bound by that, what they say. Elections have a dynamic. And this one's going to be a bare knuckles affair, because we know this because the last one was. And how whoever the Democratic nominee handles himself or herself vis-a-vis Donald Trump. And we know he'll handle himself, he'll be aggressive in his own cause. So that dynamic also will change people's minds.
Yeah. John, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, when you break down the numbers, 34%, about a third of all Catholics are definitely going to vote for Trump. according to what they say a year out, right? Number one. 10% say there's a strong chance, a good chance. So that's 44%. That number in that reelect question looks exactly like his job approval numbers. You have roughly the same number who are definitely going to vote against him and are most likely to vote against him. What's interesting, I think, about this poll is who are those 9%? The 9% who are possibly going to vote for him. And really, I think that 9% is going to sit back and wait a little bit and decide whether it's going to be Joe Biden or Pete Buttigieg or Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren or Sanders or whoever the nominee might be. That 9% wants to wait and to see what the options are.
Matthew, I want to follow up with you on another issue here when we look at some of the data, because practicing or active Catholics differ significantly in their voting patterns from Catholics who do not practice their faith to the same degree or on a regular basis. So how do we think of the Catholic voting bloc when we think of this kind of big differential?
Well, 58% of the Catholics who responded consider themselves faithful to all or most of the teachings of the Church. Of that, 17% consider themselves faithful to all teachings, 41% to most. That itself forms a kind of a block here that has consistently proven two things. One, they vote aggressively. They are consistent in voting in elections. The other is that they stand apart basically from the rest of the Catholic population, where the Catholic population in those other categories tend to reflect the national averages. This group does not. They are supporting President Trump, as we have mentioned before. This group, for example, supports him, I think, with 43% right now for his reelect. These are very strong numbers, and it's one of the reasons why they're holding up Trump's numbers among Catholics.
John, to follow up on that, you've talked about how important it is to remember that Catholic votes, the Catholic voters, are not a monolithic group. Right. According to the poll, Hispanic Catholics comprise 37% of the Catholic vote, and there are key differences among the age groups as well. Reiterate to me the big differences there.
Within the Hispanic category, you have, as Matthew mentioned, you have those who are more devout and less devout in terms of the way in which they're practicing their faith, which is another factor here. But looking just at ethnicity, 2-to-1 advantage for Democrats. Among white Catholics, there's a 5-point advantage for Republicans. So together, that's a 41-point swing when you look at the party based upon your race and ethnicity, one. And we see similar differences based upon generation. This is the first election where we'll see more votes cast by Generation Z, Millennials, and Gen X than baby boomers and the silent generation. So paying attention to generation gap in American politics within the Catholic community is as important, I think, as any other kind of subgroup or topic that we're thinking about.
Carl, really quickly, does any of that surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me. For years, Democrats and Republicans each had that kind of a cardboard cutout view of Latino voters, right? The Democrats say, oh, well, they're working people, they're poor, Cesar Chavez, they're our kind of liberal, and the Republicans would say, oh, well, but they're family values people. They go to church. They're Roman Catholic. They'll be for us. It's actually a much richer, first of all, it's not all Mexican Americans. It's Puerto Ricans and Central Americans, Mexican Americans. But also, an issue that comes through in the polling they care about intensely is health care. So, abortion, yes, but health care. And so the two political parties have sort of pandered to them in the past. And I think if they pay attention to John's polling, they'll realize this is a more nuanced, they have to have a more nuanced approach.
Like I said, it is very detailed, and that's why we appreciate you guys coming in to break it down for us and giving us what's really going on here. Matthew Bunson, Carl Cannon, John Della Volpe, thank you all so much. Coming up, more from our exclusive polling, including analysis of how Catholics view President Donald Trump. Police in Washington, D.C. say a man wounded 2 security guards today at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. The suspect used his car to hit a woman, then chased a man into the church and stabbed him. Investigators say the suspect had a relationship with the first guard he attacked. No visitors or guests were harmed in the incident. We continue now with another look at our EWTN News Nightly Real Clear Opinion research poll. Catholics, especially engaged or active ones, have been a crucial voting bloc in every American presidential election in the last 50 years. 2020 appears to be the same. Our poll finds 53% of American Catholics plan to vote for President Donald Trump or are open to the possibility. More than a third, 34% of those polled, say they are sure to vote for the president. Joining me now is Tim Carney, commentary editor for the Washington Examiner and author of the book Alienated America: Why Some Places Thrive While Others Collapse. Tim, welcome back to the broadcast.
Thank you.
What's your reaction to the percentage of American Catholics who are planning to vote for or open to the possibility of voting for President Donald Trump?
Well, yeah, you've got a third of the country is Trump's base that's with him, and a third of Catholic voters is the same. And then, as with the the rest of the electorate, you've got about 20% that are swinging. And what I see in them, or that are possible, what I see in them is these are people who, A, it depends on how the economy is doing. B, it depends on who Democrats pick as their nominee. And a lot of these people are people who, some of them like what the economy's done, what Trump's done, and don't like him personally. Others tend to be Republicans who usually vote Republican, but then with Trump have specific problems. So it really is going to depend on the campaign. They say in sports, this is why you play the games, this is why you run your campaigns, is for that 20%.
As you had mentioned, at this point, we don't know who the Democratic nominee will be. How much of an influence do you think that will be on that 9% of Catholics who say they could possibly vote for President Trump?
I think it'll be really big. And Joe Biden, by these poll numbers, looks like he might be the strongest. Bernie Sanders does pretty well. Those are the two who are well above 50% among Catholic voters against Trump. And I think the Democrats have dodged a bullet with Kamala Harris dropping out. I think she would have done really poorly among undecided voters, particularly undecided Catholics. So, but Biden and Sanders both really have weaknesses. To do well in early polls does not mean you'll do well in the general election. Both of them are older. Biden has really had sort of senior moments on stage. Sanders is seen as a lovable grandpa, but as more of his policies get dragged out during a campaign, that could drag him down. So that they're doing well early shows that they're likable. How they do under the spotlight with Catholic voters and non-Catholic voters is a different question.
Tim, as I've been talking to a number of different people about this poll, I've noticed there's a difference of opinion expressed on whether there's such thing as a, quote, a Catholic vote in the way that politicians sometimes talk about it. What are your thoughts? Is that an accurate term to use?
Well, I think it's imprecise is what I'll say. On almost all of these questions in this poll, the difference between the Catholic voter and the non-Catholic voter is within the margin of error. Okay, yeah, even on things you might suspect would be different, whether it has to do with religious liberty or abortion. On the abortion question, on the question, should it be illegal? Yes, Catholics are more likely to say yes, but it doesn't seem to influence their votes. The other detail in this poll, only 40% of the Catholics polled here go to Mass weekly or more. And so when you drill down to that subset, in other polls I've seen, that's where you do see a distinctive behavior, more about being pro-life, more about the Catholic teachings affecting their policies. But if you take the whole universe of Catholics, including the 60% who don't go to Mass every week, then it looks almost exactly like the U.S. electorate as a whole.
Very interesting numbers. In your book, which we have here, Alienated America, you travel throughout the country reporting about the divide between the nation and some of the reasons behind it. Have any of those conditions improved since President Trump came into office?
No, the core problem in the struggling parts of America is that people don't belong to enough things. They're not connected to their neighbors. People don't go to church enough. That's why it's a shuttered church on the front of my book. And I have not seen those things materially turn around, except that sort of a rising economy over the last 3 years has helped some places sort of get back on their feet. So there are really some of these places that are alienated that I looked at in 2015 that are doing a little bit better. But on the whole, you see the opioid problem is getting worse. Suicides are at an all-time high. So we haven't seen a turnaround in the worst parts of the country, but there are some places where you have seen some uplift because of the economy.
I want to ask you about, really quickly, there's an important demographic that we were looking at when it comes to this poll, and that's the younger voters, this generation gap. How important do you think younger voters will be in electing the next president?
It'll be very important, and this is why when Democrats look at a really young guy like Pete Buttigieg, it has this special appeal, because otherwise you've got 3 baby boomers or 2 baby boomers up there on stage. And so the young voters will, they usually don't vote in that high numbers, but every 4 years somebody says, well, this will be the year that the young people come out to vote. I generally bet that it doesn't happen, but Donald Trump has had a big effect of motivating his opponents. So if he motivates the Democratic youth to come out in unprecedented numbers, that could this time be the tipping point.
Now, it's very interesting. Like I said, this poll leads to so many interesting discussions, and we appreciate your coming in to talk about it. Tim Carney, commentary editor for the Washington Examiner and author of Alienated America. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
To see the full results of the polling and to learn more, go to EWTNnews.com/poll. We will have more analysis tomorrow here on News Nightly. Up next, Pope Francis tells the faithful why God corrects our mistakes with tenderness. And the head of a diocese in Ohio tells us about his meeting with the Holy Father.
La tradizione che non è un museo di cose vecchie.
Pope Francis says God corrects our mistakes with tenderness. At his daily Mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father says God will always offer us comfort, but it's up to us to open our hearts to receive it. Pope Francis also says the Lord is overjoyed when sinners approach him to repent. Bishops from Michigan and Ohio are in Rome to meet with Pope Francis. They're there to provide the Holy Father an update on their dioceses. The bishops met with the Holy Father in groups once every 5 years. The bishops will remain in Rome for the rest of the week. They will visit the Vatican departments and celebrate Mass in the major basilicas. Alan Holdren, our EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief, sat down with Bishop Jeffrey Monforton of Steubenville to talk more about his diocese and his first ad limina visit to the Vatican.
What are the standout challenges and hopes of the Diocese of Steubenville?
Well, I think for us, obviously the economic challenge is the most glaring challenge that we have as a diocese, but we also live in a culture now where so many people question their faith. We're grateful to have a place like Franciscan University, a school to assist us. So how can we better sharpen our skills to create missionary disciples?
And you met with the Holy Father, Pope Francis, today in an audience, private audience with other bishops from Ohio and Michigan. What is it that you spoke about in that encounter, and how long was it? Can you tell us some details?
Yeah, about 2 hours, and as you would imagine, a lot of, I guess you would say, headline discussion, which was very, very important. We had a Holy Father there who's speaking to us like our Father, but also as a brother bishop.
And it's been a sort of difficult last several years in the United States, a lot of challenges faced by the hierarchy, issues of sex abuse, and also financial issues in some places. Were those things that came up during your discussions?
What I could say is basically everything was on the table, which was important, that we would not in any way have any filter or hold back.
And was there anything that the Pope shared with you that he'd like to see in the bishops of the United States?
Well, just encouragement, obviously fraternity, continued fraternity, that we look back to 2 millennia ago. We were unified. We may not agree on everything, but the bottom line is we're here to share Jesus Christ.
And this is also a moment for you, besides meeting with the Pope and other Vatican officials, to meet with each other, to spend time with each other and go to the tombs of the apostles Peter and Paul. How has that been for you as an experience of community, really?
Oh, outstanding. We began yesterday at the tomb of St. Peter, and how best certainly to begin as a bishop, because if you look at our episcopal genealogy, most likely we're traced back to either St. Peter or St. James. And then today was John Lateran, which of course is the cathedral.
And you celebrated Mass. Well, you were the homilist.
I was the homilist, and I don't think anybody fell asleep, so that's always a good sign. I know I didn't, but I already had 2 cups of coffee in me.
Good Italian.
Yeah.
And what was your message to the fellow bishops?
My message basically was to get out, obviously, to the fringes, to the peripheries, to the people. We had to be available, and the gospel passage was perfect. The Jesus or the shepherd leaving the 99 to bring the one back who was astray.
Mm-hmm. And for you, as you look forward to the rest of the week ahead, what is it that you have on tap? What are the bishops going to be doing?
Well, we still have Congregation for Clergy coming up, and a few other meetings as well. One is protection of minors, also extremely important, especially in today's day and age, the work progress that we are making. But beyond that, I'm looking simply for direction and accompaniment.
And you will have specific encounters with the different Vatican departments. What's the one that you're most looking forward to?
Well, actually all of them, because this is my first ad limina. And so I'm grateful to have the opportunity to converse or dialogue with the heads of each one of the dicasteries or the congregations.
Well, thank you so much, Bishop Monforton.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it.
And our thanks to Alan Holdren for that interview. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.